arts in West Australia. It's wonderful to feel supported. And I particularly want to thank all of you for coming, but especially those of you, my wonderful friends who brought big groups of people, because it's a pretty awful job to have to talk in front of an empty room. So it's lovely to have a whole lot of really great friends who recruited big numbers, and it just feels lovely, and what a great setting. And thanks again to the Sea Gardens people. And Lorraine is over there. Lorraine is going to take us all on a fabulous walk. Lorraine lives here in Margaret River. When you drive into Margaret River on the bus highway, on the left there are some pencils, and that's on the right, and that's Lorraine's house. And she does community walks. So when she's taking us all for a walk later, you'll be able to ask her more about the community walks that she does all around the district. So thanks very much, Lorraine, for being part of this. Okay, everyone. So because of this setting, and because the novel is set in a beach kind of setting as well, I wanted to talk to you about the way nature inspired my writing. And really, as my friends at work would say to tell you today, this is going to be a talk about animal pornography, but not really. But that's what my friends talk about me as being an animal pornographer. So anyway, I'll give you some background into how I found out about the bees and the wasps that feature so strongly in the novel. Because without the bees and the wasps, we wouldn't be here today, or at least I wouldn't be here today, you might be. I wrote many previous drafts of the novel as part of my PhD in creative writing at UWA. The draft that became the novel that some of you may have read must be about version number 20. And it was really only due to the wonderful editor at UWA Publishing that it became a kind of a readable, sellable commodity. So I'd really like to thank Linda, who's not here today, but Linda Martin from UWA Publishing worked magic on the very rough draft of that PhD thesis. For a creative writing PhD, you need to have a novel-sized creative work and a related exegesis, or a long essay. And together they have to total around 80,000 words. I'd known for a long time that my exegesis was going to be about my obsession, Anita Bruckner. How many of you are familiar with Anita Bruckner, the novelist? Oh, okay, a few. For those of you who aren't familiar with Anita Bruckner, she's a Booker Prize-winning author who didn't start writing fiction until she was 56. She's now 86, and she's only recently stopped writing after 24 novels. And she's also written many books of history, the history of art in particular, and lots of book reviews for reputable UK newspapers. Bruckner was born in London to Jewish parents, and she did what all good girls do. She stayed at home and looked after her parents until they died. So she had a very sad private life, but she had a fabulous professional life. And she was the first history professor of fine art at Cambridge University, the first female professor of fine art. Her home life was lonely and sad, and many of her protagonists shared her knowledge of what it's like to be without a loving partner and children. I was so struck by the beauty of her writing that for the long essay I wrote for the PhD, I decided to read all her 24 novels chronologically. And it was then I saw a pattern that many critics had overlooked. She describes London as a Darwinian jungle city where her protagonists are the hunted, the doomed to extinction. And the characters that the protagonists are fatally attracted to are the hunters and the survivors. And Bruckner always describes these ones as people with big teeth, and they walk around in kind of camouflage colours. They're the real kind of hunters. They're the ones that are the fittest, the most viable in Darwinian terms. The protagonists, the doomed protagonists, are the ones in the Bruckner novels who always look at nature and notice all the small changes in nature, the seasonal changes, the blossoms, the new apples in the markets and things like that, while the very kind of the hunters, the ones who are viable and successful and the ones who breed, overlook all the beauty in nature. They're too busy kind of carrying on with the business of surviving and passing on their genes. So because the essay in a PhD and the novel have to be linked, I decided to make Stella the protagonist, similar to Bruckner's lonely protagonist. But after only a few chapters, I was so bored with Stella that I actually dreaded sitting down to write about her, and I was seriously considering chucking her in. And then along came the bees. I'm a journalist, and for the last 7 years I've worked in public affairs at the University of Western Australia. At the same time I was doing my PhD, and Brenda Walker, who many of you may know, was my supervisor. Do many of you, have you heard of Brenda Walker, many of you? Yeah, she's written quite a few novels, including Reading by Moonlight, or How Reading Saved Her Life. She had breast cancer, and she wrote about how she read certain novels and poems and things through all the stages of breast cancer and how they really sustained her. So, where did I get to? So I was talking about my supervisor. So one of my responsibilities in my role as a public relations person at UWA is to write media statements about the research and so on that goes on at the university. I love animals, so whenever anyone around the campus does any research about animals that's about to be published in a big journal, my colleagues always let me do that particular job. And that's how I found out about the honeybees. At UWA, we have a fabulous bee expert, Tiffany Bates. And back in 2008, just when I was considering killing Stella off, Tiff gave a talk entitled, "Have We Killed the Romance? Queen Bee Breeding in the Modern Age." Tiffany is a fourth-generation beekeeper, and she works in queen rearing, queen selection, and artificial insemination. I became enchanted bees because of Tiff's talk. She talked about the virgin queen's flight to a special location for her courtship dance, her murderous ploys to kill off all her rivals, her mysterious ability to select only some of her lovers as fathers, and the swirling comet shape made by the drones as they desperately tried to mate with her, and then their death, and after their suicide spiralling dance. Tiff and her team at UWA are very concerned about colony collapse disorder and the varroa mite, which are destroying bees around the world. As yet, these problems haven't reached Australia because we're so isolated, but Tiff is worried that one day they might. Bees are very important to humankind because at least 1/3 of what we eat comes to us through their pollination. So Tiff and her colleagues are undertaking research to better understand the biology of the honeybee so they can breed Australian bees that are resistant to these problems. So after Tiff's talk, I went to Brenda and I told her I was sick of Stella and I wanted to write about a beekeeper instead. And Brenda said, "Why didn't I turn Stella into a beekeeper?" And that's when the book really started to take off, when Stella really had, for me, she had a character as soon as she became a beekeeper. Seeing Tiffany in her bee suit handling the bees, often without gloves, and so in tune with the world of the bee, and going with her up into the hills to see the hives, enabled me to see Stella as a real person, with bees of her own, caring for them as Tiff did. I'd always been able to imagine Ari in the novel because I once knew someone who had stayed in Fremantle, had been incarcerated in Fremantle prison before it closed down, and he was also Italian, so I kind of used him as my Ari character. And the guides at Fremantle prison, when I went on the tour there twice, was so fabulous that it was really easy to kind of imagine Ari in the prison. And the other thing about Ari that I sort of imagined was one of the things he really misses when he's in prison is food, and he misses sort of seeing his wife hold the pasta as it plunges into the boiling water, the long strands of spaghetti. So yellow is his favourite colour because of that lovely yellow pastel. So I could see Stella and I could see Ari, but it wasn't easy for me to see them together. I've written a few romance novels which are very different because there's that sexual attraction really from the first page. But Ari and Stella didn't have that. So I just sort of kept plodding along with their story, hoping for inspiration. Researchers at UWA in Kings Park and ANU, at about the time when the novel went into another big nosedive, were working to save an orchid that's unique to the southwest. And they call the orchid a pretty cheat and a liar. So the wasps came in and saved the day, and this is what happened. So I had to go along and write a media statement about this research. And the research is really interesting because there are 9 species of Dracaea orchid, and one is already extinct and the others are endangered. And scientists are battling to save it, along with its specially adapted pollinator, the Zaspilothinus wasp. In a bizarre interaction, Dracaea orchids have evolved to look and smell exactly like the female wasp. So by offering the male wasps the false promise of sex, the orchid is pollinated without having to produce costly food, nectar and pollen, as most plants do. Each of the orchid species, which are different sizes, has its own amorous wasp species, a corresponding wasp. Each orchid also has its own chemical group with which to attract the wasp, and the difference between the specific sexual pheromones, which comprise compounds new to science, can be as little as 2 hydrogen atoms. By identifying the compounds involved in ensuring the orchid's pollination and knowing how to attract the pollinators, the team hopes to preserve the remaining Dracaea species. So how did the wasp help me write the novel? When I was writing the media statement about this research, I was actually allowed to hold a little wasp as the lid was taken off a beaker that held the orchids. And I was holding this little wasp which doesn't sting, and the beaker was there, and I could actually feel in my fingers all the way up my arm his desperation to get to this his lover, his so-called lover. So in the novel, I give Stella the pleasure of holding the wasp because I wanted her to feel it too. I wanted her to know how strong the urge to live is, even in a tiny little insect, and how it's so certain that there's someone out there just waiting for him. This certainty in a little wasp makes her be able to begin to think out of the fog of her grief. And because Ari likes the June plants so much, he and Stella are right for each other. The sea is important in the novel too, although neither of them ever really go to the beach and swim and lie on the sand. But it's there as a force of nature and a reminder to both of them of how far away from home they are. I think shipwrecks under the sea and of telephone lines under the waves that didn't manage to keep her parents in touch with their family on the other side of the world. Because the novel started off as a PhD, it had to be fairly literary. So in previous versions, I made more of Ari's remembering learning Shakespeare's play The Tempest at school. And The Tempest ended up being responsible for 3 of the names in the novel. Prospero, the magical Duke of Milan, became the name of Stella's father, Pros. Ari is the spirit Ariel, who sings that lovely verse, "Where the bee sucks, there suck I. In a cowslip spell I lie. There I couch." And I made an evil which sick Orax and a cowslip is Stella's husband. And in a way, I think we all suck where the bee sucks, because we're all part of that web of life, which we'll see more of later, thanks to the novel with an environmental thrust. Because remember, Anita Bruckner's protagonists always notice nature, the little things in nature. And to celebrate the beautiful but endangered natural setting that is, the Southwest and Cottesloe as well, I made Ari a Cottesloe Coast Care volunteer who eventually persuades Stella to join. The fabulous Coast Care website, with its detailed information about local flora and fauna, was very helpful to me, enabling me to find out about the seasonal changes as Stella, whose daughter has been killed in a motorbike accident, gradually comes to terms with her loss. So Stella's marriage to Orex, the country GP, falls apart when Myth dies, and she comes to live in Cottesloe. And it's the first time she's lived close to the sea, and she comes to find it sighing, soothing. I just want to read a quick little extract from the beginning of the novel when Stella sees the Coast Care volunteers for the first time. She leaned across the railing and looked at the silvery dune. She saw a dozen or so people bending over plants, weeding or collecting seeds from the native vegetation that was being regenerated all along the coastline. She'd heard about them somewhere, the Coast Care people who volunteered to green the suburb. There was grace in their silent stooping and lifting, and even from a distance, Stella could sense their contentment. She saw that one of them was looking in her direction and raised arms for her. Not for her, she thought. Stella's sea is divided into seasons, and at the beginning of each is the description of a plant that Stella sees on her walks with her daughter's dog. These walks and the need to care for the dog help Stella stay alive. For example, this is the plant that features in her first few summery days after moving into the rundown rental property she and her husband own. Produce green or yellow flowers in summer. Its leaves are silvery grey because they're covered with white hairs. When Willem Vlaming made landfall at Rottnest in 1696, he used the daisy bush as a herb in his pink pot. So I think we're all looking forward to being with Lorraine soon, and she'll be able to show us not perhaps the Cottesloe coastal daisy bush, but other plants around locally. That's the end of this kind of talk bit, but we've got maybe 10 minutes, or 20 minutes or so. Would anyone like to ask any questions? No questions?
Did you work closely with the science department at UWA?
I didn't work, Agatha, for those who didn't hear you, Agatha asked if I worked closely with because when you write media statements, you have to kind of learn quite a lot about the science to write a good media statement that we send out electronically to newspapers and media outlets all around the world. So the media statement kind of is a teaser to encourage journalists to follow up and pick up the story. So the media statement has to be very accurate scientifically. So before we even send it out, we have to send it back to the scientists involved and make sure that they might written about the scientific, the bees and the wasps and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Yes.
How long did it take to write?
Oh, it took so long. It took so long. The PhD took 4 years. And then it was passed, and Terry Ann White at UWA Publishing asked me if she could read the Marcus reviews. So 3 of the markers, I had 3 markers, and one of them was David Wish Wilson, who's actually a presenter at the Writers' Festival as well. But they all gave me really the review asked me to see the novel, but as I said, it was a very literary novel because it had to be for the PhD. So it really had to be turned into something that was a lot more readable and a lot more suitable for book clubs. Linda Martin at UWA Publishing was my editor, and she really turned the novel upside down. It's completely different from. This must be, as I said, version number 20 at least. And Linda was amazing. And I kept saying when I was working with Linda, because she could see things in the novel that were kind of there, but she wanted them more brought forward and more obvious. And she kept saying, and she'd kind of be able to say, well, what about put this on this page and put that there? And she'd do it, she'd kind of work out how to do it really quickly. And I used to say, Linda, you should be the one doing the writing, not me. Because she was fantastic. I couldn't do that. I couldn't pick up someone's novel in a draft form and say, you know, if you put this bit there and that bit there and make this character do this and kill that character off completely, you don't need that character. I just couldn't do that. It's such a skill, and I was so lucky to have Linda to work with. It was really brilliant.
She wanted to kill Stella off more than once.
Yes, I hated her. I just thought she's just so kind of boring and miserable. But as soon as she became a beekeeper, I did really fall in love with her, because it really takes someone special to be a beekeeper. Because Tiff at UWA very rarely wears gloves. Who's a beekeeper? You're a beekeeper. You know all about it. But they very rarely wear gloves, and they get stung and they don't care. And the world of the bee is so amazing. Kind of socialist society, and Steve and I on the way down actually yesterday were listening to the radio. I don't know if any of you heard. The nose. Have you been stung on the inside of the nose? Oh, and apparently bees can see where we're hottest because they've got infrared vision. And this guy on the radio was saying that it's really red here and it's really red here. He said he's been stung there a few times as well. Before the daughter dies, she loves to kind of hanging out the washing or bringing in the washing at the end of the day, at the same time as the bees are coming in from all around. Stella originally lives in York, and the bees are all out foraging. Pollen and go back into the hive. And her father gave her a queen bee as a wedding present. And I like that about her father kind of being very in tune with nature as well.
And I'm assuming, is this your first novel?
No, it's my first non-romance. I've written a few pot boilers.
And is there anything for another one?
Yeah, I'm writing another one now. Yeah. Yes.
After all these rewrites that happened, do you still feel that is your book?
I do, but I think I wouldn't kind of accept full credit for the book because Brenda, my supervisor, was great. I really would advise anyone who's really serious about writing to do a course in creative writing, because one of the things I learned from Brenda was not to be subtle, to be subtle, because I'm not very subtle. And in romance writing, you don't have to be subtle, you have to be the opposite. So Brenda kind of taught me to be subtle and to let the reader do a lot more work than I was used to letting the reader do, and leaving a lot of things up to the reader, just making little quiet little suggestions and letting the reader fill in the details. And I know when I read, I don't like reading romance particularly, but I like writing it. But when I read, I love reading writers who are very subtle, who make you do a lot of the work. Because I think then the novel becomes your novel in your head as a reader, because you've had to do so much of the work. So what was the question? Oh,
Do you still feel that that is your book?
Yeah, so I feel like it was a real team effort. I do, because Brenda first teaching me to be subtle, and then Linda being able to see the story without all the kind of the dross around it, and then even the cover. The Anna who made the cover, and Terry Ann. It really, I think a book is a team thing. So I wouldn't take full credit for it at all. I think it's dedicated to Brenda, for good reason. Yeah. Oh, yes.
I'd like to congratulate you on giving credit to your editor.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Linda's actually got her own. UWA publishing is having a kind of a reshuffle, I think. So Linda has gone out on her own, so she's now doing editing. So if there are any writers out there looking for a really good editor, just Google Linda Martin and grab her, because she's fabulous. She's very, very easy to work with and lovely.
Is there any animal pornography in here?
No.
Dogs, perhaps?
Kim and I met through our dogs. My dog Harley is mad about her dog Poppy, and we were just walking as total strangers one day, and Harley smelt Poppy, my Harley, and just dragged me. He's just this big ball of black muscle. He just dragged me towards Poppy and then sort of into Kim's arms, and I said, "Oh, hello, I'm Sally." And now whenever we go for a walk, we sort of see each other on our walks, and Harley just drags me towards Poppy. Poppy's less enthusiastic about Harley. And now Kim's come with all her friends, which is lovely. No, there's no more animal porn.
I hope you don't mind me asking this, but how do you get the keep the momentum up with writing? You stop and you go for a week and then relax.
The good thing about when I began the novel, because it was a PhD, and I had to have it done within 4 years, because with a PhD by research, you don't actually have to pay any fees. So I got this fabulous tuition from Brenda, and it didn't cost me anything. But then if you go overtime, then you start paying. So there's great incentive to finish something in the 4 years. So that was a huge incentive. And then once the novel was accepted by WA Publishing, and Linda was a real hard taskmaster. She'd kind of, we'd have meetings perhaps once a fortnight, and she'd give me a draft, and she'd say, you know, I want you to do this, I want you to fill this in, I want you to, you know, put a bit of dialogue here, or take all of that out there, and so she gave me kind of set tasks to do. So that kind of kept me going. But it wasn't like writing a romance. With writing a romance, when you've got two characters who are kind of really strongly attracted to each other, I think that attraction kind of drags into the story. I remember once, this has only happened to me once, but I was writing a story about a woman called Margot, and I spelled her name Margaux, and my oldest son, when I was writing, was only about 10, and he'd look over my shoulder and he'd say, "How's Margaret going on?" But Margot was this huge woman. She was a virgin, and she was about 36, and she was a magazine editor, and she never ever had a boyfriend. And anyway, she meets this guy, and she's brave enough to go away on a holiday with him, not really knowing him. They just go off together in a combi van. And I couldn't wait to get to Margot every day. I just really enjoyed her so much. And with Stella, I didn't have that kind of same feeling of, you know, interest in Stella's personal life. But Margot was fabulous. And once I was actually writing about Margot, typing away without my son looking over my shoulder, and I was kind of making her do something, and I could almost feel her hands coming out of the computer screen and saying, "I want to do that, you silly bitch." And okay. So I changed that scene, but I didn't have that with Stella. But it's lovely. I've got a friend who's an artist, Leonie Broadhurst. You might know Leonie Broadhurst, some of you. She's quite well known. And she said that once, and she's been an artist for a long time, she said once she was kind of making a stroke on a painting with some gold paint. That's her trademark, is gold paint. And she felt as if some creative force was actually moving her hand. So I think occasionally a writer or an artist might feel in touch with a kind of a creative force, but usually it's just hard work, hard slog. And there's an acronym, which is quite a useful acronym, for any kind of artistic endeavour, I think, and it's Been Mad, which stands for Bugger in Inspiration, never miss a day. So in other words, just keep slogging away, and keep slogging away. It's kind of always at the front of your head, and you always remember it, and then you make odd connections. People might say something, and you might say, oh, that's a good idea, I could add that to the novel, or, the sparks fly if it's right here. But if you only do it every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks, you have to reread so much of it to kind of get back into the mood again that you waste so much time. Yes.
So as a child, did you love to read and write? Did you have imagination?
Yeah.
Did you have imaginary friends?
Yeah, all of that.
Energy,
Yeah, we lived in Katanning in the 1960s, and Katanning was too far away from the big TV transmitter in Mount Barker to be able to pick up television. So we had the ABC radio, and that was it, and lots of books, and just my brother and I in town. And so we did live a really world of our imagination. And then I went to boarding school, and I'd be so bored sometimes when I was supposed to be studying that I'd be writing stories instead. Yeah, so I think not having TV, I think, was a great way to start writing, because you have to make stories up in your head, because there's no stories sort of coming into your lounge room for you. So actually, I don't like television. I'm really sad that my children all watch TV and love it, because I hate it.
Are there any more questions?
We might, guys, if anyone, don't feel you have to do this, but if anyone wants to come up and get a book, and I'm happy to sign for you, and then we'll just enjoy our morning tea, and then go for a walk with Lorraine. Thanks very much, everyone.